Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
All right, everybody, it's Debbie Potts, and I'm excited to talk to Dr. Amy Rolfsen, a fellow Canadian up near Whistler, to talk about athletic performance by testing and not guessing what is going on under the hood that I talk about all the time. And I want to talk specifically about the GI map today. And Amy works with the Diagnostic Solutions Laboratory and helps doing lab interpretation and much more, and works with a lot of athletes because she's near Whistler, where there's all sorts of year-round outdoor sports. So Amy, thanks for coming on my podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Debbie, and thanks for the introduction. So like Debbie said, I am a practitioner. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I work in Squamish, BC in Canada. I have a private practice and I see patients every week, but I'm also an independent contractor with Diagnostic Solutions Lab, the lab that runs the GI map test. The reason I wanted to work for DSL is because I have a clinical practice focused in GI health, and I really wanted to have a greater impact than just working with my patients. So I like to work with other clinicians, other practitioners, and let them help their patients. So I get their understanding of the GI map, their interpretation way up high, so they can help more people.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I myself, personal trainer in the fitness world for 25 years, and always wanting to help people as well get healthy. And we can't really get people to improve their health without knowing some key factors, as GI map identifies some internal hidden stressors that are chronic stress that can lead to all sorts of chronic inflammation and a cascade of events that we'll dive into today. But I think it's really important to learn why to test, because I spoke with you the other day and talked about how many athletes don't spend the money on improving their health. They'll spend the money on a bike, new race wheels, new skis, all sorts of toys. But when it comes to investing in their own health, I think people don't even really think about it. So I just hope providing this information and these good, valuable takeaways from the show today, why you need to test and not guess, with a practitioner that can assess all this information and help identify your missing pieces of the puzzle so you can perform your best, but also look at your health from the inside out. Are you healthy? We really want to strive to be healthy right now, but also, more importantly, what does your future look like? How is your longevity? So are you hammering yourself into the ground now and becoming broken from the inside out, and not worrying about what your life is going to be like 20, 30, 40 years from now? So hopefully we can help people out kind of understand why they should test with a tool as a GI map. So thanks, Amy, for putting these slides together. So let me open this slide. I'll put it back up.
Good. And I agree with you, Debbie. I think our bodies can and should do the most amazing things. And I applaud endurance athletes for the things they do. It's incredible. But then at the same time, as a functional practitioner, which you and I both are, we're thinking of function not just right now, but in the long term. So, how are you going to feel about your choices when you're 80 and 90, and, what's your quality of life going to be? So we'll talk about that a little later on as well. And
I must say, I did Ironmans, 15 Ironmans, and until I dug myself in a hole, and people might have read my book, Life is Not a Race, that I shared all this, like, there's a reason I'm doing what I'm doing right now. I'm following my passion because I feel like it's my purpose to explain this information to you, because no one could help me when all this happened to myself in 2013. And it didn't happen March 2013 that I became broken. It was years before that my body was breaking down, but I did not know, or I avoided those red flags, because as many athletes, we're driven, we're ambitious, we're high performing. We want to do well in our sports and in life and excel, but was I creating more damage than good? So that's why I think, looking at the GI map, what it can tell you, but how as practitioners, we kind of put it together with the whole plan and not just look at this and treat results, because that's what people did for me. That's like, okay, I'm not getting anywhere, but how we can apply all this to our protocols that are per client because we're all individuals. So Amy, tell me when to switch a slide and
Sure. Let's look at the next slide, where I
whoops, I'm gonna get my finger on the right button.
It's okay.
Here it is, down here. All right, here we go.
Oh, I did not quote a paper on the next one. So talking a little bit about the GI map. So this is the test that we run at Diagnostic Solutions Lab. It is a stool test, a comprehensive stool analysis. And what we do that's different from other companies is we use quantitative PCR technology, which is looking at the DNA of organisms. So we're looking at bacteria, good bacteria, bad bacteria, kind of good, kind of bad bacteria, as well as fungi, viri, and parasites, so protozoa and worms. And then in addition to that, we're also looking at a number of markers for GI health. So we're looking at inflammation, we're looking at digestion, we're looking at gluten sensitivity, we are looking for blood in the stool, we are looking for immune function. What else are we looking for? We're looking for a fantastic enzyme that can affect your hormones, which is a really interesting piece to add in there. And so I love this test. I've been using it for years in practice. And then just over a year ago, I started working with the company, like I said, to have a greater impact, to help other people understand the test better, because it really comes down to interpretation of the test. And so for practitioners, if there are any practitioners watching this podcast or listening to the podcast, we do have support at Diagnostic Solutions Lab. So if you are in the experience of being a new practitioner, looking at the test and not knowing what to do, call me. My job is to help you interpret the test, to help you get your level of understanding up, and you can keep on calling until you get it. And for patients, if you have a GI map that somebody ran for you that, you know, maybe they weren't able to interpret, find a practitioner that knows what they're doing with the GI map, somebody like Debbie, who can help you put that test into clinical context, because the test is just one piece. The test is numbers, it is really useful information, and looking at patterns on the test can be really, really important for your health, and you can really unwind your health, but you need somebody really skilled in interpreting patterns and then putting it into the context of your clinical health, in your clinical picture, and putting it all together and figuring out a plan. So that, I would say, is the most important part. There's the running of the test, but then there's the implementation, and you've got to do the right things using the test.
Well, as practitioners too, I think what I learned, as I was kind of saying earlier, that we look at the whole picture. We don't treat lab results. We assess and investigate and put those missing pieces of the puzzle together to help someone restore back to their optimal self, to be their best version of themselves, versus just, here's what my lab says, let's take this supplement for that, rather than the whole picture. Like in FDN, we call it the dress for health success protocol. Yeah.
And along those lines, you can call it a protocol, but nobody's actually using protocols as in the same treatment for every person,
True.
Treatment for every marker. And I think that's important, individualized health plans. But here's a great paper from the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition, just talking all about the gut microbiota in athletes and how it is affected by different forms of activity, how basically the bottom line was that activity does improve your microbiota in diversity and abundance and richness up to a certain level. And it also goes into nutrition, but basically the gut microbiota plays a huge role in everybody's health, including athletic health, in energy harvesting from food, in hydration, and we're going to get into that in a few slides. The benefits of having a healthy microbiota, even beyond the detriment of having an unhealthy microbiota, your organisms actually do things for you when they're in your gut, and you need to appreciate them and eat and act for your microbiota first.
Yeah, for sure.
That's all I have to say there.
Yeah.
So the characteristics of a really good microbiome, it's pretty simple, but it is really hard to achieve. So simple is not the same as easy. So what we're looking for is diversity. So a lot of different organisms. You want to have a huge profile of organisms. Abundance means that you want to have a lot of them, but it's not as simple as that. So you don't want to have a lot of pathogens. That's not okay for abundance. You want to have a lot of normal flora. And that's where the balance comes into play. So it's the relative abundance of normal flora to abnormal to opportunistic flora, I would say, where the good ones outweigh the bad ones. And that's really important. So you can have a pathogen on board at a low level, or you can have an opportunist, but if you have enough normal flora and a good immune system, it should be kept under control. And then the concept of resilience is the gut's ability to take on stressors, because no matter how you look at being an endurance athlete, having that chronic exercise component in your life and the chronic activity, it is a stressor on the body. It might feel like stress relief. It might be what you do to relax at the end of the day to go for a run, but it is an internal stressor on your body. It is an oxidative event, and it can damage both your intestinal lining. Even within an hour of a run, you can have increased intestinal permeability, and it can affect your microbiota, so the balance of your microorganisms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything to comment there, Debbie?
No, I think that's perfect. I think the big word is resilience that we talk about a lot right now. It's like how to improve your health and your immune system, become more resilient, and what exactly that means to people, I think is a good one to define a little bit more of as we talk about the microbiome, but resilience is so essential right now in our world.
Yep, personal resilience, and then the resilience of the little guys living inside you, because, cell to cell, you've got more microorganism cells than you have human cells. And so we've got to take care of those guys, and we've got to consciously work to boost up the ones we want to have on board.
Yeah. It's always weird that we are kind of the host of a whole world living inside of us. Years ago, when I started learning more about the microbiome and how they're, all the new research coming out, how many trillions of gut bugs live in us, and like we're just the host to them. They're living inside of us and having their own little city.
Exactly. And how many of our decisions are actually our own decisions? It's hard to know. They can definitely affect our neurotransmitter. And so here is just a short list, kind of athletically based list of the benefits that you can get from a balanced and health associated microbiome.
Sleep we know is a big one. Mood, I think it's a good red flag when your mood is off, right? When you're moody, which relates to lack of sleep, which relates to lack of probably microbiome diversity. They're all connected.
Exactly. And a lot of those organisms are actually making some of your neurotransmitters for you. Energy as well. So in a lot of different ways. So a lot of your energy harvest from food can come from your microbiota and its ability to digest your foods for you. But then also, if you are, eating foods that are not agreeing with your digestive tract, or if you have some inflammation there, if your body is expending more energy trying to digest your foods and trying to make your GI tract work, it doesn't have as much energy for the rest of your body. So say if you have a certain amount of energy allotted to mental functioning, to your lungs, to your heart, to your muscles, and to your GI tract, and your GI tract is taking more than its fair share, that could lead to all sorts of other issues. Usually what I see is fatigue, brain fog, but it can be all sorts of things. We're going to talk about the sneaky little symptoms that can indicate a gut imbalance in a couple of slides. Hydration, though, moving on the list. I missed immunity. So immunity is huge. Your microbiota is so deeply intertwined with your gut lining. So that barrier function, which I've listed at the bottom here, which is basically your inside versus your outside world. And when you think about the GI tract, a lot of us don't always think of the inside of your GI tract as the outside of your body, but really it is. And that's the weirdest concept, that you've got these cells lining your GI tract that are actually your outer membrane and protecting the rest of your body from the outside world. And the things you eat are actually not entering you until your gut cells give them permission to enter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's key part in our world, again, immunity. And that's why I keep saying, test and not guess your gut health, because as we go into the different markers on the GI map, how they can tell us information of our strength and resiliency of our immune system, which I think so many people, as we'll get into, are not as healthy as they think they are and as resilient. Just because they're fit and strong on the outside, people don't realize they're not necessarily fit and healthy on the inside.
Yep, it's worth a look, a deep dive inside. And so the next couple of things on this list go together: nutritional status, metabolism, bone density. So your organisms living inside you can make some of your nutrients. They can also take your food and convert it to really important nutrients. They can convert it to metabolic byproducts that then feed your secondary metabolizers in your gut and feed other organisms. But if you have an overgrowth, or if you have the wrong organisms, or if you have inflammation, it can actually inhibit your ability to absorb nutrients like minerals, iron, B12. So if you have this chronic iron deficiency which in athletes, I don't know how often you see this, Debbie, is chronic anemia in our female athletic patients, but it is so prevalent in our society, that anemia, which can be definitely multifactorial, but one of the deep causes can be malabsorption of iron.
Yeah, and I know for myself personally, I've always been slightly anemic for years because I never ate red meat until last year. Hanging out with my carnivore friends at KetoCon and the low carb cruise with Jimmy Moore, everyone ate meat, and my body's like, I think I'm ready to eat red meat because I'm low in all those items, as you're saying, iron and L-carnitine and all this stuff, B12. And so I think it is, looking at nutrition another time, but just how really important that iron level is, especially for female athletes.
Yeah, and how did it feel the first time you had some red meat?
Well, TMI, I threw up like the first 6 months. Every time I ate meat, I couldn't digest it. Plus, we'll talk about H pylori sometime, but how if you lack of HCl to break it down. So a big part is what we always talk about too, is what you're eating, but how you're eating and how you're able to break down and absorb your nutrients. But if you are, starting to eat heavier meat a lot more than you used to, or, if you never ate it for years, that you're able to have the proper factors to break it down and utilize that, because that's a big part of that was my problem. It's like, okay, I haven't had to digest meat, and now it's, your HCl and H pylori is maybe another topic, but yeah, it's so essential. But eventually I did feel a lot better. And my workout was like, oh my gosh, I guess I needed that extra iron and all those nutrients in red meat.
Yeah, and I would put out a pretty good guess that your microbiota had shifted to a plant-based microbiota and was not ready for that meat consumption.
Yep.
Whether it even got to your small intestine, we don't know. It might have just hit the stomach and come back up, but so interesting. And the same would go for fiber when you're increasing your fiber. And I'm sure you've worked with patients on that. Or
Yep.
clients. Do you call them clients or patients?
Clients.
Clients
Yeah.
for you, for me. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that it's always start low and go slow. Although it seems as if people transitioning from vegetarian, vegan to eating meat, sometimes it's hard to stop because your body is so, your body will be calling out for things.
Yeah. Well, it's that Goldilocks effect, and I'll switch to the next slide as we're waiting, but it's the goal, like not too much of this, not too much of that, just the right amount for your body. And, I found that just eating one way or the other, you have to have that right combination that works for your microbiome.
Exactly. So I think we've addressed this slide already. The things you do today should not negatively impact your quality of life tomorrow or at any point in the future. And that's something that I stand by in my practice, and, take it as it is.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right,
So,
gut imbalances.
Yeah, so I do see a lot of athletes that have frank gastrointestinal symptoms. So I do see a lot of bloating. Often
Yeah.
patients who will go for a run, so they've got perfect digestion, except for when they go for a run. So they're, triathletes, marathon runners, and they run, and then 20 minutes into their run, they have diarrhea, sometimes bloody, sometimes not. And you wonder what the heck is going on there. It is a very common phenomenon and worth seeking help for. But I would call that a good gastrointestinal symptom. Bloating, upper GI, things like belching and heartburn are really, really common. IBS is really common. But here's what you may also see in yourself as an athlete or a non-athlete that can signal some gut imbalances. So fatigue, including muscle fatigue. And muscle fatigue can be normal to a degree, but if you notice as you age that it is, or as you go on, that it is harder to recover. So if it takes, a few more hours or a few more days to recover and be able to do the activities your body is used to doing, you could look into your GI tract. Hormonal changes, we see this a lot. Hormonal changes can be from a lot of sources, but the gut can be one of them. decreased immunity. So if you feel like you're getting sick a lot, and I would kind of lump into their food sensitivity. So sometimes I see people who have increasing food sensitivities over time. You'll see that they'll be sensitive to dairy, and then suddenly they can't eat eggs or grains or carbs, things like that. And I think I already talked about increased recovery time with fatigue, so I won't talk about that, but skin conditions, eczema, rashes, psoriasis, all sorts of things there in skin can signal that there are gut imbalances. Autoimmunity would be kind of a longer term change with gut imbalances, and we do have some autoimmune trigger markers on the GI map that are really interesting, and they come into play a lot of the time, not just with athletes, but with anybody. And then joint pain. So if you're having joint pain, it is worth looking at the gut, it's worth looking at foods, it's worth seeking out a practitioner, basically. And that's, anything else you want to add to that list, Debbie?
Well, I think is a lot of people wait too long to get help. And I think that's, don't wait till you can't do anything, like you're just struggling. I think it's being aware of what are some early signs, there's some dysfunctions there, not until you hit that rock bottom. So I think is, like you said, before symptoms start, ideally. And that's why I feel like we almost need to have this preventative program. See, okay, am I healthy? What's going on inside? Because we have no idea the information we're going to get from these labs. What we're just guessing. So it's really important, I think, to do this now, especially as I was talking to Aaron Carson, who has EC Fit and Rally Sport and Boulder, and all these athletes are doing all this strength training and doing great stuff for mobility and strength, and going into off season because there wasn't really a race season this year, but in theory it's off season, and working on stuff. And I emailed her yesterday. I'm like, this is when I think all these athletes should be adding in this stuff. Let's work on your off season. Let's work on your health building exercises you should do, including, your microbiome, including the lab testing, and increasing that balance, restoring balance, because you don't know any of this information. And I think I really regret not doing this in the middle of my race season, off season, because I was racing, for 12 years until I hit my rock bottom that I couldn't ignore it. So my lessons learned, or what I'm trying to help educate everyone else, like, do something now, take action, take ownership, take responsibility of your health. If you're training and racing this much, what are you doing to make sure you don't have what happened to me happen to you?
And like we said before, endurance exercise is a stressor on the body.
Big one.
If you're putting stress on your body, you should be taking way better care of your body. If you know how to do that on your own, fantastic. And it's great. A lot of athletes do take great care of themselves, but sometimes it's nice to have an objective look at your health, to actually look inside, get a baseline, and start with somebody who can look at what you're doing, look at your diet, and help you do a mini overhaul to a huge overhaul, and see what you can do to mitigate that stressor on your body. It doesn't always have to be slowing down your activity, although sometimes that can help. But there are things you can do in the rest of your day that can really, really help, like sleep.
Yeah.
Because
sleep is huge. And I think a lot of people ignore and just push the envelope a little bit and race, as I say, from morning to evening time, just doing so much in the day. Maybe a little bit more before COVID started and people are forced to slow down. You didn't realize, oh my gosh, I was always busy. And even myself's like, this new slower paced lifestyle, this is not what I've been doing the last few years when I thought I was going slower pace in life. But I think it's, getting help, but, not waiting to get help is my last thing I say. I know someone reached out and they've been struggling for 15 years. Like, why? They couldn't get the right help. And so that's why I think, looking at the whole picture is essential. So I'll stop talking, move on to the next one. But test, not guess. We talked about optimal diet is huge, but not one size fits all, right?
Exactly. And I find a lot of athletes, when I first see them, they're focusing on their macros. So they're just saying, okay, I'm doing keto, I'm doing, this percentage of fat, this percentage of protein, this percentage of carbs, and totally ignoring the micros. So they might be doing like a cream cheese and fried chicken keto, or maybe not fried chicken, but that kind of keto, or they're following vegan diet, but not a clean diet, and they're, you know, as long as they get the macros, they're fine. But what about the micronutrients? Because if exercise is an oxidative event, a stressor on your body, that will suck up a lot of nutrients, and for a good reason. You need to quench those free radicals. But guess what also needs those polyphenols is your microbiota. They love the healthy veggies and, you know, the bright, beautiful colors, and they need nutrients too. And so does your body. So it's a sharing, you know, it's a sharing event. There's your body by itself, there's the extra things you're doing with your body, and then there's your microbiota, and then there's more things that I'm not even thinking about. And then there's the concept of, you know, limiting fiber and fat before big races, things like that. And if you're doing that maybe a couple times a week, a couple times a month, that can impact things. If you're limiting fiber on a daily basis, and some people limit it because they can't digest it, and that's okay, Debbie. We can move on to the next slide.
Yeah. I just want to make sure we have time to go through the lab examples. Oh, let's hop over this one.
I feel like you and I could talk forever.
I know these topics are big for athletes. It just, you know, it's my passion as it is for you. You're working up in Whistler area, and I think it's just, we see all these athletes just not getting this information, and it just makes you like, come on, people, let's do it.
Exactly. Yeah, so here's some imbalances that I frequently see on the GI map in high performing people. And so I see a lot of low normal flora. I see a lot of bacterial overgrowth. It can be SIBO, which is fairly common. So with that chronic stressor event of exercise, which can, of course, feel really good with the endorphins, but it can affect your cortisol metabolism and your body's response to cortisol, which can affect your vagal tone, which is your vagus nerve, which goes to your GI tract and helps with motility. So you can end up with a GI tract that doesn't move as much. And if you're doing things like runs or high intensity activity, you can actually shunt blood away from your GI tract into your muscles. And so your GI tract doesn't have as much blood flow, as much attention from your body. And that can lead to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or large intestine bacterial overgrowth, just bacterial overgrowth in general. That compromised gut lining, the permeability that we talked about, is really, really common to see in athletes. Digestive insufficiency, where you just don't have enough stomach acid, enzyme production, bile acid formation, and then the gut immunity. So I have seen some athletes that get every infection that comes around. And I would say, since iron deficiency is so prevalent, iron is a huge cofactor in the immune system. And so you do need to have enough iron, but not too much iron. So you can't just pop iron pills assuming you have low iron, because a lot of people don't, but a lot of people do. And then, not specific to athletes, but I do see a lot of other organisms, kind of oddballs that pop up, and parasites and things like that.
Well, isn't it, I found for myself, my story was chronic stress from all sorts of reasons. Your stress, speaker of stress, gets overfilled. And so your first line of defense is down. So you're more vulnerable to all this dysfunction. And when things get broken down, say, you know, low stomach acid, and then everything else is kind of downhill from there, because then you get all these bad guys coming in, and your guards are missing from your castle, and suddenly you've got, you know, all these parasites coming in, viruses, and you don't have the microbiome in the right balance, and we don't have the gut wall lining intact, and we have mucosal damage. So everybody is, you know, the players are not where they're supposed to be, and they're damaged goods. So then we just don't have any self-defense anymore. And I think that exercising a lot, the accumulation of busyness in life, chronic stress, but then you add on all these additional external stressors that are hiding until you have this overfilled speaker of stress overloading the entire body.
And it comes back to resilience again.
Yeah.
As it always does. Okay, so a couple of things that you can do to help yourself. I would say one of the more important things, if you think you have a more complicated case, seek help. Debbie's a great person. I've spoken with her at length. She is very competent. There are lots of really competent healthcare providers out there. Ask for recommendations and find somebody. But eat a balanced, plant-forward diet. So it doesn't have to be, you know, plant-based vegan. It doesn't have to be any particular diet. I really don't care what particular diet you follow, but I would say a plant-forward diet with lots and lots of color, plenty of fiber. And it doesn't have to be the same every day, but as a baseline, eat a good diet. Don't eat junk.
Mm-hmm.
Get a lot of sleep. That's huge for repair. You can try some fasting. So I like to just do a basic overnight fast. Some people like to do a 16-hour fast. I would say minimum 12 hours, and then consider a fast between meals. So that can really help sweep out the small intestine between meals and keep that bacterial overgrowth from piling up, which is a very simplistic way of looking at it, but it really does help doing that fast between meals in the daytime. Drink tons of water, spend some time in nature, and well, the moderate exercise, that may be an unpopular view here, but it's worth considering, or taking a rest day, or doing some other things to mitigate what you're doing to your body. So modifying your activities in some way can be really helpful, I will say. And that's, yeah, all I have to say there. So let's talk about some cases here. So the first case here is a 37-year-old female. She is an exhausted mother of 2 young children, and I would say that her children were not sleeping through the night, so that was an added stressor, but not necessarily gut related, but really affects things. And she is an avid triathlete. She was waking up in the morning nauseous, not really able to eat in the morning, feeling really bloated after meals. Her bloating got worse throughout the day. She had a lot of kind of upper GI bloating, belching, and reflux. The reflux was all the time. Lots of fatigue, and she was kind of curious as to why her athletic performance was going down and down and down. And then we ran her test. So if you can pull that test up, Debbie,
Yep.
that would be great.
Share different screen.
And we don't have to pull the slides back up. I can just pull up my notes on the patient if that's
So
easier.
this is patient 1, right?
Hopefully, yes.
So
yes.
this is, if people are watching the video version, we'll just kind of talk our way through it. But the GI map test results, here's what we're looking at based on that case study.
Yeah, and so this first page is our
Nothing.
page. Yes. What we're looking for here is less than DL. So below detection limit is the normal finding on page 1. There are findings that could be within the normal range or low level, but in my mind, there is nothing that's truly normal on page 1. Anytime I see something, I don't necessarily want to kill it, but I do want to seek out answers as to what underlying imbalance could have allowed a pathogen to exist and correct the underlying imbalances. So it's not always, killer herbs, antibiotics. It's, correcting digestion, correcting immunity, things like that.
Well, that's important part to note is we're looking at the why. All right, this is showing up in your lab result. What does that correlate with all the other information we're collecting in your assessments, nutritional therapy, and your lifestyle? And then look at these labs, right? And you're looking at, okay, here's what's showing up, but let's just not zero in on that one thing, but let's look at the why. So you're looking at pathogens, parasitic pathogens, bacterial pathogens, and then viral pathogens. And the next page is H. pylori that I found I had.
Can't wait to take a look at your test one day. So yes, this H. pylori, this is a significant level. So at the E3 level, what that means is that we're looking in the thousands of organisms per gram of stool. So the E3, that's scientific notation, meaning 10 to the power of 3. We've got 4.4 times 10 to the power of 3, or 4,400 organisms per gram of stool. And, by my standards, that's quite a bit. This may not be enough to cause severe upper GI symptoms like pain and ulcer, but certainly it can cause a lot of downstream effects. It can affect the stomach acid. H. pylori is a huge neutralizer of stomach acid, which can affect your mineral absorption. It can affect your iron levels. It can affect all sorts of things. Minerals and iron, protein digestion, and it can allow in other organisms and really set up the stage for things to overgrow. If the pH is favorable, bacteria will grow. And so we can already see in her normal flora. So the next section down is our normal bacterial flora. We want to have these organisms, but we don't want to have too much. So we don't want to see them overgrowing like this. We see a pretty common pattern here that is the Clostridia class overgrowing. That's right in the middle. Thank you for the point here, Debbie. And the Enterobacter is fairly common, which is actually an inflammatory organism at this level. And then it's not uncommon to see both the phyla overgrown here at the bottom. So the phyla microbiota, these are the larger groups of bacteria. So within the bacterial kingdom, there are 6 phyla. These are the 2 largest, and together they make about 80 to 90% of your bacterial population. So we're really looking at the population level of normal flora here. And what it tells me when I see them both overgrown is that her body is very hospitable to bacteria at this point. Normal bacteria, maybe abnormal bacteria. We haven't seen the whole bacterial profile here. But what we also see a little bit above that thin black line there, and you can point it out, is the Akkermansia muciniphila, which is a really important organism. And there are actually studies showing that physical activity can increase levels of Akkermansia muciniphila. For her, that's obviously not the case because she's below detection limit here. And since we're looking at normal flora, we want to have all these organisms detectable. In a clinical context, what I see really frequently is a correlation between low Akkermansia and poor mucosal health, poor barrier function. So sometimes we'll see low immunity, sometimes we'll see some other signs of intestinal permeability, but to me, that's a sign that I should look for other signs of permeability, and maybe we'll find some. It may also be reason enough for me to do a bit of gut healing. What do you think?
So these ones are normal bacterial flora. So the ones in black, those are what are showing up. So that's in the good, healthy, balance amount. Again, the Goldilocks effect, not too much, not too little, just that right amount. Then the ones in red, the 3 different markers here that are higher than you want, that shows clues that there's dysfunction in the gut and to the mucosal barrier. And then there's a clue to the Akkermansia. That's a lot of information. We can dive into that one. I know with that it's not showing up, because that's interesting, as you're saying.
Okay. And then when we see overgrowth like this, it is fairly common to see this with digestive insufficiency. So here we see on page 3, we've got more bacterial overgrowth. So here we're looking at the opportunistic organisms, the organisms that only overgrow when they're given the opportunity. So the opportunity might be small intestine motility issues. So to look at this patient, I would be wanting to rule out small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And, I may even treat it as such, but I would say, to be clear, the GI map does not test for SIBO. It does not test for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, but after looking at lots and lots of tests, we do know which organisms tend to grow in the small intestine when they're growing. And so I can make a pretty good guess, and I can usually say, okay, this person would do very well to get a SIBO test. And sometimes in my practice, I will treat empirically looking at this and looking at symptoms. But I would say this is quite a bit of overgrowth. Mm-hmm. The bacillus is a very common finding, as is the enterococcus. And then a little bit lower down, seeing that level of strep. That's very, very common to see with H. pylori present. And the effects that H. pylori has on the stomach acid. Yep. Strep right there. And then the Pseudomonas is a bit less common, a bit more inflammatory. It can be a biofilm producer. It can sensitize us to foods, specifically gluten. And then the Methanobacteriaceae, which is right above that thin black line. It's not flagged. I've got you jumping all over the place, Debbie. But this to me looks like quite a high level of Methanobacteriaceae. And so if you speak SIBO, if you talk a lot about SIBO, so this is going to be your methane producers. And this level to me looks high. So constipation, gas, and bloating are common with this organism. Sometimes I don't see constipation, but I do see a lot of gas and bloating.
So on this additional dysbiotic overgrowth bacteria, ideally you don't have anything showing up here, or should you have?
On every person,
what's ideal?
You'll see a little bit of bacillus up to kind of the low E5 level. And then you'll see a little bit of Methanobacteriaceae, maybe up to the E6, E7 level. And when I say the E6, E7, I'm referring to the numbers kind of at the end of that little number, if that makes sense. Yeah. Hard to highlight things. And then down under the potential autoimmune triggers, we are expecting to see 2 findings there as well. So we're expecting to see the Prevotella, which is just past half the way down there, Debbie. Mm-hmm. And I would expect to see that anywhere up to the low E7 level, so right where we see it, so I wouldn't have an issue with that. And we're expecting to see Fusobacterium at about the same level as Prevotella, and this is way too much. And so Fusobacterium is an organism that is quite inflammatory. and I would want to bring that level down. So the Klebsiella there is not an expected finding. It is approaching the reference range. It can be a histamine producer in the right conditions. So sometimes you will see symptoms even at this level of Klebsiella. I don't love letting it sit around for people. And at this level, if it were by itself as overgrowth, I probably wouldn't treat it. I would treat the rest of the terrain. But in the context of other overgrowth, I probably, it would be within my considerations to treat that. And so we don't see any fungi, we don't see candida there, we don't see any viri, which are very uncommon to see on this test. And let's see about parasites. So these are in contrast with the first page where we're looking at pathogenic parasites. These are opportunistic parasites, which can cause symptoms. I know a lot of them classically are listed as asymptomatic in the medical text, but I do see people with blastocystis and with dientamoeba with pretty marked symptoms. And we'll see them at pretty high levels. So we don't see anything for this patient, which is great. So let's skip through them. But I do see a lot of parasites coming up for people. So as we move into the intestinal health, we see steatocrit as the first marker. So that's a marker of fecal fat, and it tells us how well a person is digesting their fats. My preferred result is less than detection limit, so less than DL. At 8% fat, it's not terrible, but I like to help people along if we have any detectable fat. So I'll help them, if there's a gluten sensitivity, we'll work on that. If they are not drinking enough water, we'll work on that. If I think their kind of liver gallbladder isn't functioning well, we'll use some herbs there, maybe some bitters, maybe an enzyme with ox bile, things like that. So I do think there's room for improvement even at 8% fat in the stool. And when we see elastase 1, the next marker, that's a measure of pancreatic enzyme output. And I really like to see this at 500 and above. So at 24, that's quite low. So it can be reflecting on the lack of stomach acid that we're guessing at based on the presence of H. pylori, but it can also reflect on stress. It can reflect on GI health and terrain. And basically it's telling us that she could use a lot of help digesting her foods, whether that comes through bitters and lifestyle, like chewing her foods better, taking time to slow down, or if you want to get a quick win and give her a digestive enzyme, or you can do all those things. So I would be helping her along with this, helping her digest her food before her organisms digest it and overgrow. So we want to have an organism. Oh, go ahead, Debbie.
Well, I was just going to add in, I think that's a big thing I've learned with helping people and even my own journey is that you can't out supplement poor lifestyle habits, including eating habits. So you can take enzymes and HCl, but if you're still going to be eating, doing 10 things at once, totally stressed out, rushing when you're eating, you're not chewing your food, you're taking a bite while you're still chewing your food from your previous bite, that doesn't solve the problem by taking a supplement. So it's all that, again, working on the whole person and having a transformation that you're working on your habits, as well as getting these clues that, all right, your enzymes are probably too low. Let's take a digestive enzyme, for example. But if you don't change how you're eating, it's still going to be a problem.
Agreed. Yeah. And sometimes, if you're still working on building that trust with your clients, sometimes it can help to have a quick win while you're working on the transformation. So I'm in both camps there. Sometimes an enzyme can be a miracle worker, and sometimes it, will mask that
I just know some helping a family member that I watch eat all the time that like, okay, is this really helping when you're still eating really fast?
And then treating family members is a whole different.
Yeah, refer them out.
Refer them out. So the rest of the GI markers, beta-glucuronidase, I am fine with this level that we've got for her. It is up. And so this can be a surrogate marker for bacterial overgrowth. This is an enzyme that's put out by bacterial cells. And really kind of over 2,000 is where I would consider treating it in somebody with symptoms. And so this is fine. I would be considering bringing down her bacterial overgrowth. So ideally this number will come down naturally.
Would you run a Dutch hormone test as well? Do you do Dutch complete and kind of compare overlap?
Yeah, I'm a big Dutch lady. without actually being Dutch.
Uh-huh.
Yes, I would. And given her symptoms, I don't know if I would right off the bat unless she wanted to do a big baseline. So if within a couple of months of treating what we find on the test, she's not getting the energy she's looking for, or if she had reported, more kind of stress-related symptoms, more hormonal symptoms, more irritability, things like that, or hair loss, things like that, I would definitely run a Dutch. I'd be on the fence of whether I would or whether I wouldn't. But I do love that test. It's really fun. So the next marker, occult blood, I love seeing it at 0. That means there is no blood in her stool. Immune response here, the secretory IgA is your mucosal associated immune system. So this is a non-specific immunity. It recognizes anything foreign and will react to it. So here at 699, I like that level. I want to see it coming up a little bit, but I see that we have a lot of work to do on her test. So as we do that work on her microbiota, on her terrain, this number should come up, and I would expect to see that rise without any outside input, at least directly on the secretory IgA. The next marker, Anti-Gliadin IgA, is a marker of a local immune response to gluten. At 50, that's totally fine. That is in the ideal range, even for somebody who perceives themselves to be gluten-free. But then calprotectin, it is not a huge problem at 128, but I would prefer to see it below the optimal range of 50. For really optimal functioning, I want to see somebody below 50, and this is a marker of inflammation. So it is telling us how much neutrophil infiltration there is in the gut. I want to see very little, neutrophil involvement in the gut at any given time. I want to see it under 50. At 128, I'm not going to take any action to change this except for to treat the rest of the findings on the test and see how her inflammatory status goes down. She does have, I think we found 2 fairly inflammatory bacteria overgrown, and so bringing those levels down can help with this inflammation. And then I believe the next page was all negative. So this is a page where we look at antibiotic resistance within the H pylori, and we did find H pylori for her at the level high enough that we do report these genes, but the genes were not present. So this would mean that if I chose to use antibiotics, it would likely be effective based on this information. So she doesn't have any resistance genes that we are testing for, but we do know that H. pylori is a resistant organism in its own right. Even with none of these genes present, I do still find it really challenging to treat. It is, sometimes it comes back, sometimes it takes a few rounds of treatment.
Yeah. I know myself, when I first started my journey investigating what was going on under the hood, I had blastohominus in 2013 and H. pylori detected. And I think a lot of that was related to, now I know possibly mold toxicity, because I've realized just actually last week that I owned a fitness studio, and the ceiling tiles were always being replaced because of the upstairs yoga studio always had leaks from their showers. So then I was like, oh, that's where it came from. So it was an accumulation of things, as well as, my immune system probably down from training a lot. I was racing a ton and running my own business. So it was just, as I keep saying, it's accumulation of stressors, external, internal, that build up. And then I always think, all right, I got blastohominus possibly from swimming the 70.3 World Championship that year. It was in Vegas in this dirty brown water that no one was allowed to swim in except for this one race day. And I think, you just get all your guards are gone. So you just get whatever is around and you get that virus or that parasite. So it's good information to get, but yeah, it takes, a whole program to really figure out how you can improve all these numbers.
Exactly. And so taking this test, what I would do for her based on this test and her symptoms, since she is fairly symptomatic, she's low-grade symptomatic for H. pylori with the symptoms, the reflux, the belching, I would treat that H. pylori for her. I would treat her bacterial overgrowth. I would strengthen her digestion, and I would consider doing some work on intestinal permeability. We didn't see a ton of signs for it, but given her clinical history and her activity level, I would give her a little something to strengthen her there. I would consider running just some basic blood work, some CBC and ferritin, maybe an iron study, maybe liver enzymes. I would consider a SIBO test, maybe a Dutch test. The basic, though, would be definitely a CBC with ferritin and the differential, the white blood cell differential. And that's basically where I would start with her. I would be looking for an increase in energy within a month or two of starting treatment of her GI organisms. And if I didn't see it, then I would continue to work on her GI tract, but I would also be looking at other pathways, other routes of helping her.
So we have a little bit time left, last 10 minutes here, if we can just go into patient 2, if you want to just say I don't have the slides up, but
that's okay.
About this client.
Yeah, so this was a 44-year-old female marathon runner. She was one of those classic long distance runners that got diarrhea about 20 minutes into her runs with somebody, usually not. And she was having some hormonal symptoms. So she was having some hair loss. She was having, what else was happening? I think she was having some mood changes, some irritability, kind of weepiness, and a bit of irregular cycles. So let's take a look through her test. So page 1, pathogen page, she was negative, which is always so nice to see. Love a negative page 1. She's got a little bit of H pylori. At this level, at 240 organisms per gram of stool, I am much less likely to treat this unless she had really marked symptoms of upper GI, reflux, belching, inability to digest foods, things like that. Or if she had an autoimmune condition, I may consider it because of the connection between H pylori and autoimmunity, and a couple other reasons I might treat that. But in her, I would not choose to treat that right off the bat. And the beautiful thing about H pylori is that if you don't treat it, it doesn't usually go anywhere. And so you can change your mind. And so as a clinician, I often change my mind and I set up that expectation from the beginning. I say, hey, I don't think this H pylori is playing a huge role, although it may be looking at this bacterial overgrowth. But I like to be as simple as I can to start off. And if we need to come back to it later, so be it. We will come back and treat it. Mm-hmm. But as we move through her test, we can see that she has a pretty considerable bacterial overgrowth, similar to the last patient. She's actually got lactobacillus overgrown. And so in her, I certainly would not at this point be considering a lactobacillus-based probiotic. When lactobacillus is overgrown, I do start thinking about small intestine involvement. And that's all I have to say on page 2. And on page 3, I want to say we had more bacterial overgrowth. Yes, so large populations of bacteria here. So we've got the bacillus, enterococcus, staph and strep growing at kind of mild to moderate levels. We've got that Methanobacteriaceae, again, at a pretty high level. So none of these organisms we've seen so far are classic blood-producing organisms or organisms that will induce a bleed. So that's really nice to see. We don't always know why some athletes have bloody diarrhea. Sometimes it is, our best guess is that it's due to a permeability event mid-run, but here we see, we don't see enterohemorrhagic E. coli, we don't see any of the other pathogens present that commonly cause bleeds or uncommonly cause bleeds, but we do see a lot of dysbiosis. We also see this Citrobacter overgrowing that's not expected under the potential autoimmune triggers. And then those 2 other findings under potential autoimmune triggers, like I said, they are normal findings. And I would say the Prevotella may be creeping up a bit, but I'm not deeply concerned. So again, this patient, I may consider a SIBO test. And I may also consider food sensitivities. I do sometimes see food sensitivities. Once you remove them, sometimes you don't get that loose stool event mid-run. Have you seen that, Debbie?
Yeah, it does seem like the more stress you have on the gut coming from food that you're eating that you're reactive to, and it's also food often is stuff that you eat all the time that became tagged because there's a leak in the gut. So then it's a enemy tagged in your body. So I think it's interesting, all the different clues you can get from your poop.
Tell you a lot. So we don't see any yeast for her. We don't see any viruses, which is beautiful. I want to say there weren't parasites, but now I'm not remembering. There were no parasites.
Good.
And again, looking at intestinal health there, she's got a bit of steatocrit. There's a bit of fat coming out, got a bit of a lower, trending low elastase 1, which again is pancreatic function. And we want to see that over 500. So this woman does have a higher beta-glucuronidase. It's popped up over 2,000. And again, that's the enzyme put out by bacteria. And what it can do is it can reactivate estrogens and other products of glucuronidation. So things that have gone through phase 2 detox in the liver, it can reactivate them and put them back into circulation. So it can contribute to a high estrogen level. So for this, I would want to test hormones for her and see how her estrogen metabolism is. And I would want to help her with that, especially at 44, she could be approaching perimenopause and maybe approaching it quicker given the stressors on her body. It's hard to say or predict. But this level of beta-glucuronidase, given her level of symptoms, I would treat that. Fecal occult blood here is at 0, so that's a really relieving finding for somebody who is seeing blood in their stool very rarely. It's nice to see that it's not a baseline, low-level bleed. And then moving on to her immune response, she's actually got a really good secretory IgA. So that, in contrast to the 2 tests we've looked at, I do often see a really low secretory IgA for endurance athletes. So
that's what I've seen low in every lab GI map I've gotten back lately on secretory IgA. That makes me want everyone to test because it's so important to check what's going on with your gut.
And you are seeing, I would guess, a beautifully skewed population in the direction of endurance athletes.
Well, a lot of my clients actually are not necessarily athletes. They're just trying to, feel better, get healthier, but they want to exercise, or some that just have stressful jobs and worlds. But I would love to see more athletes get these tests and see what's really going on.
What's happening. And I would say secretory IgA is one of the slowest markers to respond in a lot of cases. It can take sometimes years before we see that coming up, depending how well you can change your terrain. So that can be a fairly stubborn marker, but I have seen it quickly. Again, Anti-Gliadin, our gluten response, looks pretty normal. She was not gluten-free, so under 100 is where I like to see that for somebody who's eating gluten. And again, her calprotectin was borderline high. I want to see that under 50. So her inflammation is a little bit up, not surprising given her overgrowth. But then, so for this woman, we added on zonulin. So this is a marker of intestinal permeability, and this is quite high. Not surprising to see this, and I do see this all the time. So when I said that I would test for food sensitivities, I probably wouldn't if she had high zonulin. Like you said, Debbie, sometimes you get a food sensitivity test back for somebody who has permeability, and every single dang food comes up.
Yeah.
And really, on a practical and clinical level, it's really debilitating, and really, it takes people's motivation down when they see that they can eat one food. So sometimes I will wait a couple of months to run that food sensitivity test, but I sure do feel comfortable doing a targeted elimination of some common food sensitivities, the things that can be gut triggers. And so I believe that's the end of her test. She did not have a high level of H pylori, so we won't have anything on page 5 for her. So for her, what I would do, I would treat that bacterial overgrowth. I would consider doing a SIBO test to see if to see the extent of small intestine involvement. Mm-hmm. I would consider doing some food eliminations if I thought she would benefit from those, and I do think she probably could. And people are often semi-aware of their food sensitivities, and sometimes they're eating them anyway.
Yeah. That's why I think sometimes it is good to get a food sensitivity test, or like I've been using that NutriSense continuous glucose monitor, because then you can get some valid information, knowing that you're doing more damage to yourself and you're taking 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and your healing rebuilding process. If you keep putting gasoline to the fire, that you really can't get better, heal your gut if you keep adding those toxic foods into your body.
And it depends on the person too. A lot of people do respond well to me saying, okay, well, let's take out these 3 foods for 6 months. And other people want to see it on paper.
Yeah. Sometimes you just need that evidence, like prove to me that I can't eat these. I need that validation.
And you get the test back and it's actually 45 foods. Sorry. I was going to get 3 out of your diet and we're going to get, an extra 42, but I don't 42 foods out of people's diets. Just for the record, I would still do a targeted few foods.
Elimination process.
Exactly.
So I know we're just to wrap up, what do you think people should do to take a next step to investigate more if they're curious about getting more information on the GI map? I know, my website is debbiepots.net, but how can people get a hold of you if they want to get more information?
They can contact customer service through Diagnostic Solutions Lab. They've got my email through there if they have any questions to follow up on the webinar. You can find practitioners through customer service as well. I know you, Debbie, are really well versed in the GI map, so I think you're a great person to see. If you want to see someone locally, great, although you work virtually, don't you?
Yes, now that I'm in northern San Diego, not Seattle, so everyone started work virtually because of our COVID, but now I think works great. Everything's on Zoom, which I've been using for years podcasting. So I'm used to the Zoom world, but I think it makes it easier and more accessible to meet with the clients online, because even before COVID started, I had clients that were just 20 minutes away from me, but they're too busy to meet in person. It was just easier online. So I know as FDN practitioner and doing nutritional therapy, it's just sometimes easier for people no matter where they live.
Yeah, and it's nice not to have to, put on pants and leave the house. And you've got a lot going on. So I have 2 kids, and I know I really don't like bringing them to appointments. So it's really nice to work virtually. I work virtually as well, and it's been a game changer for a lot of people. You don't have to leave. You miss that in-person connection, which I always love, but I like the virtual connection too. It's at diagnosticsolutions.com. There is a tab for patients. I want to make sure I'm not lying about that. With information on the test, it's a fantastic test, but you cannot order it yourself. You have to order it through a practitioner. So Debbie can run them. I can run them. A whole lot of people that I speak to on a daily basis are proficient in the GI map, interpreting it. So,
well, I know as FDN practitioners, we order our labs through our FDN medical director program, and we do consults with another expert as yourself to go through the results, and we look at that whole picture, as I said, assessing everything, including their intake forms. And I love to add nutritional therapy and look at their lifestyle habits and look at, a food log with their symptoms and really kind of see where are you now, what's going on. Don't change anything, but just tell me what's your daily world like now. What are you eating? How are you eating? When? And just get all that information, because it's so essential to really just look at that lab, and then let's look at the lifestyle habits and nutrition habits and what are your stressors in your world. And then let's start investigating the internal stressors.
And tell the truth.
Yeah, exactly. Don't lie. I can't help you if you're just fibbing about everything and that you just ate that bag of chips and you had, a bottle of wine, and then you had, all these carbs the next day and sugar. So that's why I like, I've been wearing this NutriSense for 2 weeks, and it is good information because you can't cheat, because you have this constant reading of your blood sugar level. So we know if you ate something that your body didn't like, if it spiked up your blood sugar and your blood sugar didn't come back down and recover from it. So it's kind of fun. More clues, the more fun it is investigating really what's going on.
Interesting. Insomnia, probably, to see that if their blood sugar is spiking in the middle.
Yeah, no, that's what I was emailing about. And I don't think anyone's really researched this. So I have a new research study, if you want to join in with me, on the pathogens and viruses, fungal infections, stuff going on in your microbiome, how that impacts your glucose levels. Because at nighttime when you're sleeping, there's more activity in the pathogens. And also, it was a full moon last night, and I read something about, full moon, and I was like, okay, this is big, huge rabbit hole I'm going down. But I'm fascinated by, why is the blood sugar higher? And then it should be at nighttime when you should just be lying there sleeping, you're burning fat. Why is the blood sugar elevating? And then there's the Chinese medicine, the body clock. And so 1 to 3 a.m. is the liver time, and how that's impacted. So I just totally was geeking out on, let's look at your lab results and then look at your blood sugar levels, while you're sleeping. And then if you have the Oura ring, let's look at your quality sleep, your HRV, and just really get all this data. So do you know anything about parasites and activity during the nighttime?
Well,
Glucose?
I've heard that they are more active at the full moon. At nighttime, that's a fantastic question. I don't think I have.
Or just not with the full moon, but necessarily, but just at nighttime when you're sleeping, pathogens, are they more active? And how would it raise your blood sugar?
Some of them maybe.
Is there stress? Cortisol?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a complicated answer there. Yeah, cortisol will play, or often, cortisol will rise and then your blood sugar will rise, and that is a big issue. Or no, your blood sugar drops and then cortisol rises and then your blood sugar rises. So that, I haven't investigated its link with pathogens.
See, I have a new thesis study. Glucose and pathogens. Who has a ton of microbiome imbalances, any pathogens, candida, mold infection. Let's look at their blood sugar levels while they're sleeping.
And from my perspective, if I see those pathogens, I would say, don't enter the study. Come to see me and I'll help you treat them.
Yeah, I know. That's funny.
I won't do that to your study.
That's all right. It would be my clients. They're going to not want to work with me because I'm like, let's look at this too. Yeah. So what's your website, Amy, where you can send people to?
Good question. amyrolfsen.com is my website.
Good. Yeah, all right. Well, thanks for sharing all this great information, putting together the slides for us, and we'll put everything in the show notes for people to learn more and how to get a hold of Amy or myself or whatever questions you might have. And you can look at the video. The slides will be on the YouTube channel, Low Carb Athlete, and you can find more there. Make more sense of what we're talking about. All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at debbiepotts.net. You can help us to continue to grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.